The sun had barely begun to rise over the sprawling city skyline, casting a soft golden hue on the glass towers that reached for the heavens. Inside one of those towering structures, Sarah made her way through the sleek, polished lobby, her worn-out shoes tapping softly against the marble floor. She was an ordinary cleaner, but in her heart, she carried dreams that were anything but ordinary. Every day, she arrived early, taking pride in her work despite the routines that felt monotonous. As she pushed her cleaning cart, she could not help but gaze out of the glass windows, longing for a life beyond the reflections of the bustling city. Today, as she meticulously wiped down the glass, she let her mind drift. She imagined what it would be like to sit behind one of those shiny desks, to wear a tailored suit, and to exude the confidence that came with success. Maybe one day, she whispered to herself, her breath fogging up the window momentarily before it disappeared. The thought was fleeting, but it lingered long enough to make her heart ache. The skyline was a beautiful sight, but it also reminded her of all that seemed just out of reach. As she continued to clean, Sarah noticed that the office was beginning to wake up. Employees trickled in, their faces a blend of determination and weariness. She smiled at a few familiar faces, but they barely acknowledged her presence, too engrossed in their own worlds. She was used to it. After all, she was just the cleaner, a background character in the grand narrative of corporate life. But today felt different. The air was charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the upcoming meeting that had everyone on edge. Not long after, the elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and in stepped Ethan. He was the epitome of success, a millionaire CEO whose presence commanded attention. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and a crisp white shirt, he walked with a confidence that seemed effortless. Yet, as Sarah observed him from a distance, she noticed the tension etched into his features. His brow was furrowed, and the corners of his mouth turned down slightly, betraying the weight of the responsibilities he carried. She couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy for him. Wealth and power did not shield him from stress. In fact, it seemed to amplify it. Ethan strode through the office, his mind racing with thoughts of the high-stakes meeting that awaited him. He felt the pressure from his board, investors, and a relentless pace of the tech industry. As he passed by Sarah, he offered a curt nod, his mind elsewhere. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw a flicker of vulnerability behind his confident facade. It was a fleeting connection, but it left her with a strange feeling, as if she had glimpsed a part of him that most people never saw. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah finished her window cleaning and moved to the conference room down the hall. She had cleaned this room countless times, but today, the atmosphere felt charged with anticipation. She set to work, her broom sweeping across the polished floor, but her ears were attuned to the muffled voices filtering in from the hallway. The meeting was about to begin, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity about what was to unfold. "Ethan," a voice boomed as the door closed behind him. "This project is a disaster. We're losing money, and the investors are getting restless. What's your plan?" Sarah paused, her heart racing. She shouldn't be eavesdropping, but the tension in the room was palpable, and she couldn't help but lean closer to the door, her broom resting against her leg. "I'm aware of the situation," Ethan replied, his voice steady yet strained. "But we need to pivot our approach. We can't afford to abandon ship just yet. There's potential here, we just need to uncover it." "Potential? We've already wasted so much time and resources. We need a solid backup plan, or we're going to lose everything," another voice interjected, laced with frustration. Sarah's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of their words, the stakes rising higher with each passing moment. She returned to her duties, wiping down the conference table, but her ears were glued to the conversation. "Listen, I understand your concerns, but we can't make decisions based on fear. We need to trust our instincts and be willing to take risks, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly as he tried to assert his authority. But what if we fail? You're betting the company's future on this. As the meeting continued, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts. She had no formal education, no business background, but she had a unique perspective shaped by her life experiences. In the world of cleaning offices, she often witnessed the inner workings of corporate culture, both the triumphs and the struggles. She had seen people rise and fall, and she understood the importance of resilience and adaptability. The discussion grew more heated, and Sarah could sense the frustration in Ethan's voice. We need to brainstorm fresh ideas. I want everyone to think outside the box, he urged, desperation seeping through his composed exterior. Suddenly, a thought struck Sarah. She had seen businesses thrive by simply listening to their customers and adapting to their needs. Maybe there was a way to connect the dots that the executives in the room were missing. The voices grew quieter as she returned to her cleaning, but the seed of an idea began to take root in her mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the meeting came to a close, and the door swung open. Ethan emerged, looking more worn than when he had entered. Sarah caught his eye once more, and despite the divide of their worlds, she noticed something in his gaze, a silent plea for understanding, perhaps. Are you all right? She asked, surprising herself with the concern that laced her voice. Ethan paused, taken aback by her question. Most people wouldn't dare to inquire about his well-being, much less a cleaner. I'm fine, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. Sarah nodded, understanding that he didn't want to share his burdens. Yet, as she continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change, not just for him, but for the company as well. She had overheard enough to know that the stakes were high, and perhaps, just perhaps, she had a perspective worth sharing. As she finished cleaning the conference room, she couldn't help but glance at the towering skyline outside, a reminder of her dreams. The day was still young, and she felt a stirring within her, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for far too long. She may have been just a cleaner, but she had insights that could change the course of someone's life, even if it was just an offhanded comment. With that thought in mind, she took a deep breath and steeled herself for what lay ahead. The world outside was full of possibilities, and maybe, just maybe, her voice deserved to be heard amidst the clamor of corporate ambition. As the last of the meeting participants filed out of the conference room, Sarah remained behind, meticulously rearranging the chairs and wiping down the table. She could feel the weight of the atmosphere lingering, a heavy blanket of tension that seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. The meeting had been intense, with voices raised and frustration palpable, and she had caught snippets of conversation that danced around a central issue, a failing project that seemed to be dragging everyone down. Sarah paused for a moment, her rag in hand, and glanced through the large glass windows that framed the skyline. The city outside was alive, a stark contrast to the quiet heaviness of the room. She took a deep breath, her heart racing as she thought about what she had just overheard. Did she really want to step out of her comfort zone and say something? Was it even appropriate? The urge to remain invisible warred with the desire to share her thoughts that had begun to solidify into something resembling insight. Gathering her courage, she took a step toward Ethan, who was standing by the window, his back turned to her. The man exuded an air of authority, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed success. Yet, the tension in his posture told her that the weight of his responsibilities was heavy. She hesitated, her mind racing with the implications of what she wanted to say. Mr. Hawthorne?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she winced at her own timidity. Ethan turned slowly, surprised to see her there. "Yes?" His brow furrowed slightly, and she could see the weariness in his eyes. I'm Sarah, the cleaner," she stammered, feeling foolish in the face of his sharp gaze. "I was just cleaning up after the meeting." He nodded, his expression softening just a fraction. "I know who you are." There was a pause, and Sarah felt a mix of embarrassment and encouragement. "What is it, Sarah?" Taking another deep breath, she pushed through the anxiety that gripped her. "I couldn't help but overhear some of the discussions during the meeting. About the project, I mean." "Right," Ethan replied, his interest piqued. "It's a tough situation. We're trying to find a way to salvage it. I have some thoughts," she continued, surprised at her own boldness. "I know I'm just a cleaner, but sometimes I think an outside perspective can help. You mentioned that you're losing touch with what your clients really need." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment she feared he would dismiss her. But instead, he leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, intrigued. "Go on." Encouraged by his openness, Sarah explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I heard you talking about how the project doesn't resonate with your customers anymore. It seems to me that maybe the focus has shifted too far away from them. What if you brought in some fresh ideas, maybe even from people who actually use the product? Sometimes it takes a different lens to see what's really wrong." Ethan listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to contemplation. "You're suggesting that we involve our customers more in the development process?" "Yes," she explained, surprised at how animated she felt. "You could hold focus groups, or even invite some of your most loyal customers to share their experiences. They might have insights that could lead you in a new direction." He remained silent for a moment, his mind clearly working through her words, weighing their potential. "That's not a bad idea. I've been so focused on the numbers and projections that I haven't taken the time to really listen to what our clients are saying." Sarah felt a rush of excitement. "I think people want to feel valued. If they see that you're listening, they'll be more inclined to stick with you through tough times." "Interesting perspective, Sarah," Ethan said, a slight smile breaking through the tension on his face. "I appreciate you sharing that with me. I just want to help," she replied, suddenly aware of how out of place she felt in this conversation. "I know I'm not in your world, but I care about what happens here. Good companies find ways to connect with their customers, right?" "Absolutely," he agreed, a thoughtful look crossing his features. "I'll keep your comments in mind." As she turned to finish her cleaning, Sarah felt a swell of hope. Maybe her words had made a difference, however small. Yet, the moment was fleeting as she quickly reminded herself of her place, just a cleaner. Later that day, Sarah's heart was still racing from her encounter with Ethan. She had never imagined speaking with someone so influential, and yet, the conversation had left her feeling empowered. Back in the tiny break room, she poured herself a cup of coffee, her hand still trembling slightly. As she sipped her drink, she replayed the scene in her mind, trying to capture every detail. She was lost in thought when Ethan entered the break room, his presence commanding yet somehow more approachable than before. He walked over to her, a curious expression on his face. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not," she said, surprised that he would want to talk to her again. Ethan leaned against the counter, his coffee cup in hand. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier. You have a unique way of looking at things." "Thank you," Sarah said, feeling warmth spread through her. "I just wanted to share what I thought. I've always believed that everyone has something to contribute, no matter their role." "I agree with that," Ethan replied, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes I forget that. The higher you climb, the easier it is to lose touch with the ground level." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. "It must be a lot of pressure to be in your position." "It can be," he admitted, his eyes reflecting a hint of vulnerability. "But it's also rewarding. I get to shape the future of the company, to create something meaningful." There was a pause, and then he added, "What about you, Sarah?" What do you dream of? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a long time. Sarah's heart raced as she considered her answer. I've always wanted to be a writer, she confessed, glancing down at her half-empty coffee cup. I love telling stories. It's my escape from the everyday. Why haven't you pursued that? He asked, genuine curiosity lighting his eyes. She shrugged, feeling the weight of her circumstances. Life happened, I guess. Being a single mother takes a lot of time and energy, and sometimes it feels like my dreams are just too far out of reach. Ethan nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. I get that. But it's never too late to start. You know, I started my first company when I was in my 20s, and it was a struggle. There were times I thought about giving up, but I kept pushing forward. Really? She said, her interest piqued. What kept you going? Passion, I suppose, he said, smiling softly. And a belief that what I was doing mattered. If you have a story to tell, you should tell it. Don't let anything hold you back. His words resonated deeply within her. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the office and the scent of freshly brewed coffee, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she could start writing again, pouring her heart into her stories. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to weave her dreams into her reality. Ethan's gaze held hers, and for the first time, she saw him not just as a powerful CEO, but as someone who understood the complexities of ambition and struggle. They were both chasing something, him in his corporate world, and her in her quiet dreams. I'll think about it, she said finally, a smile breaking through her previous uncertainty. Good, he replied, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To chasing dreams, then. To chasing dreams, she echoed, feeling a newfound sense of determination bloom within her. As their eyes locked, she realized that this brief encounter, this exchange of thoughts and dreams, was only the beginning. Ethan sat at his sleek desk in the corner office, the skyline of the city sprawling beneath him like a vast mosaic of ambition. He gazed out the window, lost in thought. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the buildings, but the warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled in his chest since the meeting. The sound of bustling traffic below felt distant, almost muted, as he reflected on Sarah's words. It had been a chance encounter, a brief exchange that had unexpectedly shifted his perspective. The insights she shared during their conversation lingered in his mind, challenging everything he thought he knew about business and leadership. Sarah, a cleaner in his office, had a unique view of the world, one shaped by her struggles as a single mother, her dreams deferred, and her resilience in the face of adversity. The way she spoke about her life, her aspirations, and her vision for the future resonated deeply with him. Damn it, Ethan muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. He had built his empire on the foundation of risk, innovation, and relentless ambition, yet here he was, contemplating the value of empathy and connection. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile his past decisions with the man he wanted to become. In the midst of his internal turmoil, his phone buzzed, jolting him back to reality. It was a text from his assistant, reminding him of a crucial meeting with investors later that afternoon. The pressure was mounting, and he needed to present a solid strategy, something that would reassure them that the company was on the right track. But what if the right track was not the one he had been following? What if, instead, it lay in a direction he had been too afraid to explore? Meanwhile, Sarah was at home, sitting at her small kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. The dim light of the late afternoon sun filtered through the window, illuminating the pages filled with half-formed thoughts and snippets of stories. It had been years since she had allowed herself the luxury of writing, and yet, after her conversation with Ethan, words flowed through her like a river finally freed from the constraints of a dam. She picked up her pen, letting the ink glide across the paper. What if I wrote about a woman who finds her voice in the most unexpected place, she mused aloud, her brow furrowed in concentration. The kitchen was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old house settling around her. A cleaner who impacts a CEO's life, a story about courage and change. The idea ignited a spark within her. She scribbled furiously, pouring out her thoughts, allowing her experiences and dreams to seep into the pages. Each word felt like a step toward reclaiming a part of herself she had long buried beneath the weight of her responsibilities. The stories she wrote were not just reflections of her life, they were an assertion of her identity, a declaration that she was more than her circumstances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the room, Sarah felt a sense of purpose emerging within her. She had always been a fighter, but now she was ready to share her fight with the world. The words she wrote were her armor, her way of navigating the complexities of life. Back at the office, Ethan gathered his thoughts for the impending meeting. He had always been a man of numbers and strategies, yet now he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Investors were demanding results, and the pressure to deliver was suffocating. As he reviewed the project proposals on his desk, he couldn't help but think about Sarah's insights. What if he took a risk, a bold, unorthodox approach that aligned with the values he had begun to embrace? "Ethan, you ready?" His assistant's voice broke through his reverie. "Yeah, I'll be right there," he replied, forcing a smile. The facade of confidence felt fragile, but he knew he had to present a united front. He rose from his chair, straightening his tie and smoothing the front of his blazer. As he walked towards the conference room, he couldn't shake the thought of Sarah's potential impact on his decisions. Entering the room, he was greeted by the familiar faces of his investors, their expressions a mix of eagerness and skepticism. They were used to his decisive, data-driven presentations, and he was aware that today's meeting would set the tone for the upcoming quarter. "Thank you all for being here," Ethan began, standing at the head of the long, polished table. "I want to discuss our current projects and the direction we're taking for the future." As he spoke, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The usual sides filled with grass and projections felt empty, devoid of the passion he had always associated with his work. He glanced at his team, their eyes expectant, and then at the investors, who leaned forward, waiting for the assurance they craved. "What if?" Ethan paused, taking a deep breath. "We shifted our focus to something more innovative? Something that not only drives profit, but also fosters a connection with our clients and employees?" He felt the words tumble out, unexpected and unplanned. The room fell silent, an incredulous atmosphere enveloping them. Ethan continued, "I recently had a conversation with one of our staff members, a cleaner, actually. She shared insights that challenged my perspective on leadership and business. It made me realize that we need to prioritize empathy, creativity, and the human experience in our strategies." The investors exchanged glances, skepticism etched on their faces. "Ethan, with all due respect," one of them interjected, "this is a business meeting. We need tangible results, not anecdotes." "I understand," Ethan responded, his voice steady but passionate. "But what if those anecdotes are the key to unlocking our potential? What if we embrace a holistic approach that considers not just the bottom line, but the people behind it?" Silence hung in the air, thick and palpable. Ethan's heart raced as he awaited their response. He had taken a huge risk, and the uncertainty of their reaction loomed heavy. Meanwhile, back at home, Sarah's pen paused mid-sentence as she sensed a shift within herself. The act of writing had become a catharsis, a release of emotions she had bottled up for too long. She thought about Ethan, his world of wealth and power, and how a simple conversation had sparked a fire in both of them. Her stories were no longer just dreams. They were a bridge connecting her to a future she dared to envision. As she stared at the words on the page, Sarah felt a surge of determination. She would not let her circumstances define her. She would continue to write, to express, and to share her voice with the world. Little did she know that her journey was just beginning, and the impact of her words would ripple far beyond her small kitchen table. Back in the conference room, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline as he continued to advocate for his newfound vision, aware that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But he was no longer afraid. He had seen the potential for change, not just in his company but within himself. And as he spoke, he hoped that Sarah's story would eventually inspire others, just as it had inspired him. As the days went by, Sarah found herself increasingly inspired by her brief but impactful conversations with Ethan. She began sharing snippets of her writing with her colleagues during their break times in the office pantry. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as Sarah recounted her stories of struggle, resilience, and hope. Colleagues who had once merely exchanged polite nods with her now gathered around, captivated by the honesty and authenticity of her words. "Sarah, you have such a gift," one of her co-workers, Laura, said, her eyes wide with admiration. "You should really consider publishing these stories. They're powerful." "Yeah," chimed in Jake, another colleague, leaning against the countertop. "You could inspire a lot of people. I mean, look at what you're doing every day. It's incredible." Sarah blushed at the attention. "I'm just writing about my life, you know. I never thought anyone would find it interesting. Trust me, it's more than interesting. It's relatable. People need to hear these stories," Laura insisted. The encouragement from her co-workers ignited a spark within Sarah, and she started to believe that perhaps her voice did matter. Meanwhile, Ethan was deep in thought, preparing for a pivotal board meeting where he would present a bold new vision for his company. Inspired by his conversations with Sarah, he was determined to shift the company's focus towards a more empathetic and innovative approach. He wanted to prioritize not just profit margins, but the well-being of employees and customers alike. However, he knew that proposing such a radical change would be met with skepticism from his board members. As he reviewed his notes in his sleek corner office, Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "This is it, Ethan," he murmured to himself. "You can't let fear hold you back. This is the future." He recalled Sarah's words about dreams and aspirations, and how they resonated with his own long-buried desires. He wanted to create a workplace where people could thrive, where creativity wasn't stifled by the pressure to perform. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Ethan stood at the front of the room, his heart racing as he faced the stern expressions of his board members. He cleared his throat and began, "Thank you all for joining me today. I want to discuss a new direction for our company, one that embraces innovation through empathy." Murmurs rippled through the room. "Empathy?" one board member scoffed, crossing his arms. "What does that even mean in terms of profit?" Ethan pressed on, undeterred. "It means understanding our employees and customers on a deeper level. It means creating products that truly address their needs, not just what we think they want. I'm proposing a shift in our approach, one that prioritizes connection over competition." Another board member, Olivia, raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to implement this?" "It sounds lovely, but we need concrete steps, Ethan. This is a business, not a charity." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I've been inspired by someone outside our industry, someone who sees the world differently. I believe we can learn from diverse perspectives, and I want to bring in new voices, including those from our staff, to shape this vision." "Who are you talking about?" another member queried, skepticism dripping from her voice. Feeling a surge of courage, Ethan replied, "I'd like to invite Sarah, our cleaner, to share her insights. She has a unique perspective that could really enrich our discussion." The room fell silent, and Ethan could feel the weight of their disbelief. "You want to bring a cleaner into this boardroom?" one member said incredulously. "What could she possibly contribute?" Ethan's resolve hardened. I believe everyone has something to offer, regardless of their position. Sarah has shown me that sometimes the most profound insights come from unexpected places. I think we should give her a chance. Despite the murmurs of assent, Ethan stood firm. He was determined to bring Sarah into the conversation, to elevate her voice, and showcase the importance of empathy in business. After a tense moment, he made the decision to contact Sarah. Later that day, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, inviting her to the office for a special meeting. As she read the text, disbelief washed over her. Me? In a board meeting? She whispered to herself, her heart racing. She had never imagined being in such a position, let alone speaking in front of a room full of powerful executives. When she arrived at the office, she was greeted by Ethan, who looked more excited than nervous. Sarah, thank you for coming. I know this is unexpected, but I truly believe your voice matters. Are you ready for this? Sarah nodded, though her nerves threatened to take over. I don't know what to say, Ethan. What if they don't take me seriously? They will, he assured her. Just be yourself. Speak from your heart, and remember, you have valuable insights to share. As they walked into the boardroom together, Sarah felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The board members turned to look at her, their expressions a blend of curiosity and skepticism. Ethan gestured for her to take a seat at the table, and she hesitated for a moment before sitting down. Thank you all for being here, Ethan began. Today, I wanted to introduce you to someone who has inspired me greatly, Sarah, who works with us in the office. She has unique perspectives that could help us shape our new vision. There was a palpable tension in the air, as Sarah felt the eyes of the board members on her. She took a deep breath, her hand shaking slightly. Thank you for having me, she started, her voice steadying as she spoke. I know I'm not what you expected to see here, but I believe that empathy in business can lead to deeper connections and better outcomes for everyone involved. Ethan watched as Sarah spoke, her passion igniting the room. When I clean the office, I see people rushing around, stressed and overwhelmed. It's easy to forget that behind every report and every meeting, there are real people with real struggles. If we can create an environment that acknowledges those struggles, we can foster loyalty and innovation. The board members exchanged glances, some clearly taken aback by her candor. Sarah continued, Imagine a workplace where employees feel heard and valued. They would be more motivated, more creative, and that, in turn, would reflect positively on the bottom line. One board member, the same one who had scoffed at Ethan's mention of empathy, leaned forward, intrigued. So, you're saying that by prioritizing employee well-being, we could actually improve our profits? Exactly, Sarah replied, her confidence growing. It's not just about numbers, it's about people. When we invest in our employees' happiness and growth, we create a culture that thrives on collaboration and innovation. As she spoke, Sarah felt the energy in the room shift. The initial skepticism began to fade, replaced by curiosity and, perhaps, a glimmer of respect. Ethan couldn't help but smile, proud of Sarah's bravery. After her presentation, the board members erupted into questions, their interest piqued. What specific changes would you propose? One asked, leaning forward with a newfound focus. Sarah found herself in a whirlwind of ideas, her mind racing. We could implement regular feedback sessions, create mentorship programs, and ensure that everyone feels their contributions are valued. By fostering open communication, we can build trust and camaraderie among our teams. Ethan watched in awe as Sarah articulated her vision, feeling a deep sense of admiration for her authenticity and insight. He knew they had embarked on something transformative, and he was eager to see where it would lead. As the meeting continued, it became clear that Sarah's presence had sparked something profound within the boardroom. The discussions became animated, and for the first time, The executives were not just focused on numbers, but on the people behind those numbers. As the meeting drew to a close, Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope for the future of the company and for his own personal journey alongside Sarah. The board members left the room buzzing with energy, their minds racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. Sarah's heart swelled with pride and disbelief. She had not only spoken, but had been heard. In that moment, she understood the power of her voice, and that her dreams, once distant and out of reach, were now closer than ever. The boardroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with uncertainty, as the members exchanged glances filled with skepticism and intrigue. Ethan stood at the front, a palpable sense of determination radiating from him. Sarah, seated at the edge of the conference table, felt her heart race. This was the moment she had both anticipated and feared. The fate of her ideas rested on the shoulders of these corporate giants, and she was acutely aware that their perceptions would shape not only the company's future, but her own as well. "I appreciate everyone's insights," Ethan began, his voice steady yet firm. "But we need to consider Sarah's proposal in its entirety. It's not just about numbers. It's about creating a culture that values empathy and connection." His words hung in the air, the board members shifting uncomfortably as they processed his unwavering stance. One board member, a seasoned executive named Robert, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defiantly. "Ethan, with all due respect, we've built this company on tried and true methods. What Sarah suggests is a radical departure from our strategy. We can't afford to gamble on untested ideas, especially when our competitors are breathing down our necks. Radical or not, these ideas could rejuvenate our approach," Ethan countered, his eyes narrowing slightly as he locked gazes with Robert. "We can't ignore the changing landscape of our industry. If we cling to the past, we'll be left behind." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for Ethan's support, but also a wave of anxiety wash over her. She had poured her heart into her presentation, hoping to illuminate the path forward, but the weight of the board's expectations felt crushing. She glanced at Ethan, who gave her a reassuring nod, silently urging her to share her vision. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stood, her voice wavering at first but gaining strength as she spoke. "I understand the hesitance to embrace change, but I believe our greatest asset is our people. The traditional methods have served you well, but they've also created a disconnect between the company and its employees. People want to feel valued. They want to contribute to something meaningful." She gestured passionately, her hands moving as if to weave an invisible thread connecting her thoughts to the board members. Another board member, Jessica, a young and ambitious strategist, leaned forward, intrigued. "You're suggesting that by fostering a more inclusive environment, we could enhance productivity and creativity?" she asked, her tone more curious than confrontational. "Yes," Sarah replied, encouraged by the engagement. "When employees feel heard and respected, it translates to better performance. Imagine a workspace where ideas flow freely, where innovation is born from collaboration. We can't just look at the bottom line. We have to invest in our people. That's where true growth lies." Ethan watched as Sarah's passion began to resonate with some members of the board. He could see the shift in their body language, the subtle nods of agreement starting to emerge. But Robert remained unconvinced, his brow furrowed. "And what if this fails? What's the backup plan? We can't afford to derail our productivity on a whim. Change is inherently risky, but so is stagnation." Sarah responded, her voice steady. "What I propose is not reckless. It's a calculated risk. We can start with a pilot program, a small team implementing these ideas to measure their impact. If it doesn't work, we can pivot. But if it does, we'll have created a model for sustainable growth." The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Ethan could sense the division. Some were beginning to see the potential, while others remained steadfast in their resistance. It was a delicate dance, and he knew it would take more than just words to sway the skeptics. "Let's not forget," Ethan interjected, his tone commanding attention, "that Sarah isn't just a cleaner who stumbled into this room. She has insights that reflect the voices of our employees, voices we often overlook. If we're truly committed to leading this company into the future, we must listen to those who know it best." Jessica turned her gaze to Ethan, contemplating his words. "You're asking us to trust a perspective that's outside our usual framework. But I see the merit in Sarah's approach. Perhaps we can take this risk, but let's ensure we have metrics in place to monitor progress." Robert, still skeptical, shook his head. "Metrics won't matter if the foundation crumbles. We need to ensure that any changes align with our core values and mission." "But what if our core values evolve?" Ethan pressed, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if we redefine success to include the well-being of our employees? Isn't that worth exploring?" Tension crackled in the room, the weight of the decision hanging heavy. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had come so far, and now it felt like everything hinged on this moment. "I only asked for an opportunity to prove that this can work," she said softly but firmly. "We're in an age where adaptability is essential. Let's not be afraid to challenge the status quo." There was a pause, the board members clearly divided. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "I think we should put it to a vote. Let's see how many are willing to support a pilot program based on Sarah's ideas." Ethan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "I agree. A vote will clarify where everyone stands, and if we do this, we need to commit fully." The board members murmured in agreement, and one by one, they raised their hands, signaling their position. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the votes tally. It was close, and she could sense the underlying tension. Finally, after a tense few moments, Jessica counted and announced, "We have a majority in favor of the pilot program." A wave of relief washed over Sarah, and she exchanged a glance with Ethan, who beamed with pride. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Yet, as the applause began to fill the room, Sarah could see the storm brewing on the horizon for Ethan. Some board members wore expressions of disbelief, while others whispered amongst themselves, clearly displeased with his decision to support her. As the meeting adjourned and the board members filed out, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ethan lingered behind, his expression a mix of triumph and concern. "You did it, Sarah. Your voice mattered today," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. "Thank you, Ethan. I couldn't have done it without your support," she replied, her smile genuine but tinged with worry. "But what about the backlash? I can feel it brewing." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll face it. I believe in this vision, and I believe in you. Change is never easy, but it's necessary." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie with Ethan. They had both taken risks today, and though the path ahead was fraught with challenges, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they could reshape not only the company but also the lives of those within it. The journey had just begun, and Sarah was ready to embrace whatever came next. Ethan sat at his desk, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The office that once felt like a fortress of innovation now seemed to close in around him. He glanced at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a view that once inspired him, but now felt distant and cold. Whispers of betrayal echoed in his mind, a sharp contrast to the hopeful vision he had embraced after meeting Sarah. The news had come as a shock. His trusted associate, Mark, the very person who had been by his side through countless challenges, had been leaking sensitive information to competitors. The walls felt like they were crumbling, and with every passing moment, the sense of betrayal deepened. Ethan's heart raced as he thought of everything he had worked for slipping through his fingers. "Ethan, His assistant, Claire, interrupted his spiraling thoughts as she entered the office with a stack of reports. "You need to see this. The board is asking for an emergency meeting. They want to discuss the recent setbacks." "Setbacks?" Ethan echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You mean Mark's treachery?" Claire nodded, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "We need to act fast. If we don't control the narrative, the investors will lose faith, and this could be catastrophic for the company." Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling the headache of stress building. "I don't know if I can face them again. After everything we've been through, it feels like I'm losing control." As the reality of the situation sank in, he thought about Sarah. She had entered his life like a breath of fresh air, challenging him to rethink his approach to leadership. But now, he felt more lost than ever. He needed her perspective, her strength. He reached for his phone, hesitating momentarily before sending a quick text to Sarah, asking her to meet in the conference room. Meanwhile, Sarah was at her usual post, cleaning the office floors, her mind racing with ideas for her writing. The inspiration she had drawn from her recent experiences with Ethan had ignited a flame within her. She envisioned stories that could resonate with others, tales of resilience and courage. But as she polished the last corner of the room, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Seeing Ethan's name on the screen filled her with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She quickly replied, "On my way." As she entered the conference room, Ethan stood by the large table, his face etched with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Sarah, thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely masking the stress he was under. "What's going on?" she asked, sensing that something was deeply troubling him. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I discovered that Mark has been sabotaging our efforts. He's leaking information to competitors, and it's threatening everything we built. I'm not sure how to handle this." Sarah's heart sank at the mention of Mark. She had always trusted Ethan's judgment in surrounding himself with capable people. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite her concern. "I'm contemplating stepping down," Ethan admitted, his gaze dropping to the table. "Maybe it's time for someone else to take the reins. I feel like I've failed everyone." "No, Ethan," Sarah said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "You can't give up. You're a leader, and true leadership is about resilience. It's about standing up, even when things get tough." Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. "But how can I trust anyone now? If Mark could betray me, who's to say the rest of the team won't do the same? Trust is built, not given," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "You've already inspired many with your vision. You have to believe that there are people in your corner who will support you. Look at me, I'm here, and I believe in what you're trying to do." Her words washed over him like a wave of clarity. "You're right," Ethan said, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "I can't let one person's actions dictate my future, or the future of this company. I need to confront this head-on." As they spoke, the gravity of the situation began to shift. Sarah's presence, her unwavering belief in him, reignited a fire within Ethan. He knew he had to face the board, to rally his team, and to expose the betrayal that threatened their progress. In the days that followed, Ethan prepared for the critical board meeting. With Sarah's encouragement, he began to craft a plan not just to address the sabotage, but to reinforce his vision for the company. He wanted to show the board that they could emerge stronger, united against adversity. "Ethan, you're going to need to be transparent about what happened with Mark," Sarah advised one afternoon as they worked together in the conference room, going over the presentation slides. "They need to see that you're taking this seriously, and that you're committed to rebuilding trust." "I agree," Ethan replied, his confidence bolstered by her presence. "But I also want to highlight the positive changes we've been implementing, inspired by you. I want them to see that we can overcome this and evolve into something greater." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride at being part of this transformation. "Let's make sure they understand that this isn't just about one person's betrayal. It's about the collective strength of the team and the vision we have for the future." The day of the meeting arrived, and the tension was palpable. Ethan stood at the front of the room, flanked by Sarah, who offered silent support from the sidelines. As he began to speak, the board members shifted in their seats, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "I want to address the recent setbacks that have come to light. It's essential that we confront these challenges openly and honestly." He detailed the betrayal, watching as the board members exchanged glances, some frowning in disbelief. Mark's actions were not only a violation of trust, but also a stark reminder that we must be vigilant. However, I believe that in adversity, we find our strongest selves. As he spoke, he glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. He continued, "Inspired by the insights of someone who has come to mean a great deal to me, Sarah, our new voice of change, I believe we can pivot our strategy to not only recover but to thrive." The board members murmured among themselves as Ethan unveiled Sarah's ideas, her vision for a company rooted in empathy, connection, and community. "Together," he concluded, "we will not only reclaim our integrity, but also build a company that reflects our values and aspirations. I ask for your support as we move forward." The room fell silent for a moment, and then a board member spoke up. "Ethan, this is a bold move. But I believe in the direction you're taking us. Let's not allow one person's actions to define the future of this company." As more voices joined in support, Ethan felt a swell of gratitude wash over him. He turned to Sarah, who had tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the collective resolve in the room. But as the meeting concluded, a shocking twist awaited them. Just as they were about to celebrate their newfound unity, the door swung open. Sarah's estranged father, Richard, stepped into the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly, and gasps filled the air. "Ethan," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I see you've found a new plaything to distract you from the real issues at hand." "Dad, what are you doing here?" Sarah exclaimed, shock and anger coursing through her as she stepped forward. Richard smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "I came to see how you're rotting my legacy. This company deserves better than a woman who cleans floors and a CEO who's lost his way." Ethan stood firm, stepping protectively beside Sarah. "Your legacy? You've orchestrated this sabotage, haven't you? You're the reason for the leaks." Richard laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed in the room. "You think you can take down my empire? I've been in this game far longer than either of you. You're just pawns at a much larger scheme." With newfound courage, Sarah confronted her father. "I'm not a pawn. I fought for my place in this world, and I refuse to let you undermine my worth. You're the one who's lost sight of what truly matters." The tension in the room crackled, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment. This confrontation was more than personal. It was a fight for the integrity of the company, for Sarah's voice, and for the vision they had built together. "Enough," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We will expose the truth, and we will reclaim our integrity. Your reign of manipulation ends here." As Richard's facade began to crumble, it was clear that they had won the first battle. With Sarah's courage and Ethan's conviction, they had not only confronted the betrayal, but had also forged an unbreakable bond. Together, they emerged stronger, proving that even the unlikeliest of heroes could change the course of destiny.